Tsunoda destroys the Red Bull. Is its future in danger? What happened in Saudi Arabia is much more serious than you think. And Red Bull doesn't know what to do anymore. Yuki Tsunoda had it all in his hands. A historic opportunity, a competitive Red Bull, and devastating pace in free practice for the 2025 Saudi Arabian GP. With just 8 minutes left in the second session FP2, Tsunoda was running in a promising 6th position. What happened next was a disaster that still resonates in the paddock. The Japanese driver had been putting together solid laps, very close to Max Verstappen's pace and just 0.696 seconds behind Lando Norris, the fastest at that point. But when he approached turn 27, one of the most technical and fastest on the Jeddah street circuit, everything fell apart. In an aggressive move, Tsunoda closed the trajectory too much and clipped the inside of the curb with his front left tire. What seemed like a minor error was actually a fatal trigger. That contact instantly broke the RB21's left suspension. The car went out of control without steering and went straight into the outside wall. The impact was sharp and violent, and the images were clear. Parts of the wing flying, carbon fiber everywhere, and the car destroyed on the right side. The red flag was immediately raised. The medical car was activated, the marshals rushed to the scene, and for a few seconds the worst was feared. But Tsunoda walked out on his own with a message that barely concealed the tension. "Sorry guys. I'm fine." The calm that this phrase brought contrasted sharply with the devastation of the car and the nervousness in the Red Bull pit. The session was interrupted for several minutes. What should have been the final race simulations descended into chaos. Red Bull's plan went awry, and other teams were also affected. No one expected their new driver, recently arrived from the Racing Bulls reserve team, to be involved in the worst accident of the weekend at such a critical moment. But this wasn't just a mistake. It was a symbolic blow for Red Bull. A team accustomed to perfection, control, and dominance now faced the opposite scenario. Uncertainty, pressure, and a driver who has yet to prove he can live up to it. This is just the beginning of a much bigger story. Because what seemed like a simple corner taken badly could be the first link in a chain of consequences that could cost not only Tsunoda, but the entire Red Bull team dearly. Formula One doesn't forgive mistakes. And at Red Bull, every move carries the weight of a war. That's why Yuki Tsunoda's promotion to the main team was more than just a driver substitution. It was an unexpected shock that left the paddock baffled and analysts without clear answers. It all began on March 27, 2025. Without warning, Red Bull announced that Liam Lawson would be replaced by Yuki Tsunoda. The announcement came just before the Japanese Grand Prix, the Japanese driver's home race, sparking speculation. Was it a coincidence or a strategy to please Honda and consolidate the alliance with the Asian market? The timing couldn't have been more symbolic or more calculated. The team's official statement was direct but insufficient. Lawson hadn't been able to adapt to the RB21 in the first 2 races of the year. Christian Horner called it a purely sporting decision. But behind the corporate language lay a much deeper message. Red Bull doesn't have time to wait. It's in the midst of defending its drivers' championship and desperate to regain the constructors' championship. There's no room for faltering debuts or learning curves. Helmut Marko's reaction was even more forceful. He publicly assured that Tsunoda would complete the full season, making it clear that the change was neither temporary nor subject to evaluation. A message of support, yes, but also a warning. Tsunoda would have had the support, but now the pressure fell squarely on his shoulders. There was no longer a safety net. The decision, however, had a domino effect. Liam Lawson, considered by many to be Red Bull's strongest project after Verstappen, was unceremoniously ousted. His departure exposed the fragility of Red Bull's driver system, where one bad race can mean the end. There were no second chances or time to adapt to the most demanding car on the grid. Ultimately, Tsunoda's arrival wasn't just a gamble on his talent, but a political move. Honda, Red Bull's technical partner, has been promoting the Japanese driver's career for years. Promoting him to the first team just before the Japanese GP was a clear gesture, keeping a key ally happy while the brand's future in F1 is negotiated behind the scenes. But this added pressure comes at a cost. Because from the moment Tsunoda climbed into the RB21, he ceased to be a promise and became the target of criticism, comparisons, and constant scrutiny. His debut in Japan was followed by an incident in Bahrain, and then came disaster in Saudi Arabia. The narrative changed in a matter of weeks. What was presented as a historic opportunity now looks like a ticking time bomb. And the big question remains unanswered. Was Tsunoda promoted for sporting merit or for interests that go far beyond the stopwatch? Red Bull made a radical decision. But as is often the case in Formula One, what starts out as a brilliant move can turn into a nightmare if the results don't follow. The most coveted seat in the paddock is also the most unstable. And now it belongs to a driver who no longer has any room for error. From the outside, the Red Bull RB21 looks unbeatable, dominant, a machine built to win. But inside it's a different story, because not every driver can control this beast. And Yuki Tsunoda is discovering that the hard way. The jump from Racing Bulls to the main team was more than a change of colors. It was a leap into the technical void. The RB21 is a car designed around Max Verstappen. Everything in its architecture, from weight distribution to aerodynamic setup, is fine-tuned to the millimeter for the driving style of one man. An extremely fast car, but also extremely demanding. Tsunoda said it from day one. The RB21 doesn't behave like the cars he's driven before. In his own words, he compared it to a room full of chemicals, where you never know what mixture is going to explode. Sometimes he gets the car to behave well, other times he just doesn't understand it. That instability not only affects his performance but erodes his confidence lap after lap. The biggest difficulty is finding the ideal setup. Unlike Racing Bulls, where the car was more predictable, the main Red Bull has a much narrower operating window. This means that small setup changes can completely alter the car's balance. And when you don't have years of experience with the team and the car like Verstappen, adapting is almost an impossible task. Christian Horner knows this. That's why they took an unusual decision, modifying the RB21 setup specifically for Tsunoda. They sacrificed some raw performance to offer him a more stable, calmer, and more controllable version. An adaptation that, on paper, seeks to facilitate his learning. But in practice, it raises a troubling question. Is it worth weakening the car to make a second driver feel comfortable when fighting for championships? The gap with Verstappen is abysmal. While Max extracts tenths of a second even in adverse conditions, Tsunoda struggles to find consistency. It's not a matter of raw speed. It's a problem of tuning a car that's been designed like a tailor-made suit for someone else. And that translates into mistakes, in a lack of pace, in accidents like the one in Saudi Arabia. Because when you don't feel the car, you can't anticipate its reactions. And in Formula One, a misread corner can end in the wall. This isn't the first time a driver has suffered with a car made for someone else. It happened to Pierre Gasly. It happened to Alex Albon. Talented drivers who simply couldn't master the Red Bull's character. And now that same shadow threatens to devour Tsunoda. Adapting the car is a temporary solution. But the reality is that Red Bull needs two drivers performing at their best. Not one and a half. Not one who relies on a special setup to avoid crashing. The car doesn't help. But at Red Bull, that's no excuse. Because in this team, if you don't master the machine, they replace you. It's that simple. Yuki Tsunoda's accident in Jeddah could be interpreted as a one-off error. A miscalculation on a treacherous curve. But if we look back, history tells another story. A more disturbing one. Because this isn't an isolated case. It's just the latest chapter in a series of incidents that are beginning to form a pattern. Just a few days earlier, at the Bahrain Grand Prix, Tsunoda had already been the subject of another controversial moment. In the midst of the fight for points, he collided with Williams' Carlos Sainz at turn 1. He attempted an overly aggressive switchback. He lost control. The result was a side impact that severely damaged Sainz's car. The Spaniard described the impact as a big hole that cost him nearly 50 downforce points. He ultimately retired. And Tsunoda, although he continued on track, was singled out from the opening weekend. But this is nothing new in his career. In previous seasons, incidents were already part of his history. One of the most memorable occurred at Silverstone, when he collided with his own teammate, Pierre Gasly. An internal collision that reflected poor judgment and poor emotional management in moments of high pressure. Something that can go unnoticed at teams like AlphaTauri, but for which Red Bull pays dearly. The most worrying thing isn't the frequency of these errors, but the context in which they occur. Almost always when something is at stake. Fighting for points, defending position, under pressure. That's when Tsunoda tends to push the limit. And when he does, the consequences are obvious. In modern Formula One, where every point counts and where the margins are minimal, these kinds of errors aren't just anecdotes. They're warnings. Signs that something isn't working. That the driver, no matter how talented, hasn't yet reached the level of maturity necessary to compete in a top-level team. And Red Bull knows this. They know it on the pit wall. They know it in the offices. Because every impact with a rival, every red flag raised, doesn't just affect the outcome of a race. It affects the development of the car, alters strategies, and puts pressure on a team that can't afford mistakes. The question then is no longer whether Tsunoda has the speed. That's beyond question. The real question is whether he can channel it without losing control. Because at Red Bull, talent without consistency isn't enough. They already experienced it with Gasly. They already experienced it with Albon. And now history threatens to repeat itself. If he fails to break this trend, his rise to Red Bull could become the beginning of his downfall. Yuki Tsunoda's crash at the Saudi Arabian GP left visible consequences on the car, but it also caused deeper cracks in Red Bull's internal structure. Because beyond the broken parts, the real impact of this incident could be felt throughout the season. On the immediate front, the team faces a race against time. The RB21 ended up with a shattered left suspension, significant damage to the right side, and the front wing reduced to rubble. Repairs are not only urgent, they are also expensive. And in a Formula One governed by a strict budget cap, every incident like this represents a direct threat to the team's technical planning. Every part replaced, every element rebuilt, consumes resources that could have been used to develop future improvements. And that, in such a tight fight for the Constructors' Championship, can mean the difference between winning or losing. What Tsunoda destroyed in seconds could cost the team key tenths of a second in decisive races. Furthermore, the accident came at the worst possible time. Right at the end of FP2, when the teams are gathering the most important data for race simulations. With their car out of contention and the session suspended due to a red flag, Red Bull lost valuable information about tire degradation, fuel consumption, and race pace during long runs. Information that directly influences Sunday's strategic decisions. But the most serious consequences are those that are not seen. Because every mistake feeds an already growing narrative that Tsunoda is not ready. And every time he crashes, that narrative gains strength. Not just among the fans, also within the paddock. Also in the offices where the drivers' futures are decided. Helmut Marko was clear when he said Tsunoda would finish the season. But Formula One is the most volatile sport in the world. Promises only last as long as performance. And if the mistakes persist, neither pressure from Honda nor public declarations of confidence will be enough to keep him in the seat. Furthermore, there's something else in the air. Franco Colapinto. Every weekend Tsunoda fails, the Argentine driver's name comes up louder. Red Bull knows it has options. And if the situation deteriorates, they won't hesitate to make another move, no matter how radical it may seem. Tsunoda's future is up in the air. If he manages to stabilize, find his rhythm, and consistently score points, he can still reverse the narrative. He has speed, he has the support of Honda, and he has a team willing to help him with an adapted car. But that room for maneuver isn't infinite. And in F1, mistakes aren't forgotten. They accumulate. What happens in the next few races will be decisive. Because what happened in Saudi Arabia could be remembered as a simple stumble, or as the breaking point of an opportunity that, for many, came too soon. Tsunoda's accident in Saudi Arabia wasn't just another red flag. It was a turning point. Red Bull bet big. He changed his lineup, broke with tradition, and placed all his trust in a driver who, so far, hasn't fully responded. What's at stake goes beyond a couple of carbon parts or a practice session. It's about credibility, strategy, identity, and also politics. Because this Red Bull isn't the same one that dominated past seasons without question. This Red Bull is under pressure. And every mistake, every incident, every hit against the wall adds up. Tsunoda finds himself at the center of a storm. He has speed, he has character, and now has the most demanding seat in the paddock. But he also carries expectations that could crush him if he doesn't find a way to stabilize himself. What's coming next won't be easy. The internal competition is relentless. The schedule is brutal. And every race will be a test. Now the question is for you. Do you think Tsunoda can redeem himself and establish himself as a Red Bull driver? Or was this a hasty decision that will end up costing the team dearly? Is it a matter of time or talent? We want to know your opinion. Leave it in the comments. Share the video if you think no one is talking enough about this topic. And subscribe so you don't miss the next updates. Because this story is far from over. And what happens in the next races could change everything.